Yo, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the second episode of Bodega Vibes with Brian Junn and Benny Threads. Today, we're here with NFT Inspect, which is the go-to destination for Web3 social intelligence. They allow you to connect with your NFT community, analyze community growth, see where influential people are moving, and more. Neutrality, how are you doing today?
Doing really well. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming.
Yes. So let's talk about kind of what you offer with NFT Inspect. I believe you have two products at the current moment.
Yeah, that's right. So we've got a Chrome extension in the website, and these are kind of complementary offerings, but let me just start with the Chrome extension really briefly. You're browsing your Twitter feed, you see a new NFT, new project, you want to learn more. Our extension gives you a little button that you can actually click, learn about that NFT, learn about the community, follow people that are relevant in the community, and then ultimately inform decisions that you might need to make. It's really solving a problem that we had originally encountered, that process is really laborious, and we want to make it easy. The website is available for everyone, and it's not an extension. You can just navigate to nftinspect.xyz. And what we have on the website is a lot of the same information that's available via the extension, as well as some leaderboards that show various collections and profiles that are existing on Twitter and information about them that can help you to navigate Web3. Overall, both these products are really pushing toward our vision to build up what we call the social intelligence layer of Web3, which is just giving people the insights and information necessary for them to invest their time and money wisely.
Yeah, very cool. I just know from previous discussions that you wanted to be a part of a major social change. And I feel like with Web3, that's kind of the perfect place to do it. So, I know your backgrounds with Facebook as well as Oak, your partner, as well as Amazon. So how did you guys kind of meet, and what kind of inspired you to dive into either NFTs or Web3?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Oak and I both met at Facebook. The work that we were doing there was actually around integrity. We were disrupting human trafficking networks and detecting instances of suicide in live video, really acute problems that when you've got a scale of billions of users, they actually occur on a non-trivial basis. And this is really fun and really rewarding work, but ultimately it begs this question of when you're working in a big company, your impact is in some ways limited. You can, of course, move a very small distance and you've got a lot of leverage. But for, I think, certain personalities, working at a startup or working at a new venture offers much more upside in terms of the potential. So Oak and I actually met on a few occasions, and what we decided was, hey, let's do something that's really going to push society forward. You can work on a lot of things that'll make you money, and arguably there's a ton that are available, maybe more in November of last year. But the opportunities that you have to really drive social change are actually sparser and harder to come by. And so we outlined some of the things that we really saw as problems in modern day society. And a lot of them ended up centering around the dissolution of trust and the inability for individuals to coordinate and develop a shared understanding or shared truth. That these are broad trends that have been happening over the last few decades, and they are making really big problems in how we kind of engage as a community and ultimately as a society. But neither of us are under the illusion that you can just write a library or a few lines of code and solve these problems. We really wanted to figure out, what is a good laboratory for us to experiment and kind of learn what's going to be necessary in order to start solving these problems? And then B, what is a small thing that we can do to move the needle forward that can have knock-on effects as we move? And Web3 is super attractive from both these perspectives. First of all, that it's a place where everyone has this very elegant suspension of disbelief that they are open to new ideas and to actually reopening old ideas that may not have been given the right time to shine. And it's also a space that, generally speaking, people have a whole lot of really acute practical problems today. If you think about those problems of trust, for instance, and reputation, we could probably do no worse than creating an environment of anons that are just trying to trade digital assets that have been created in, the last few months. And so this seemed like a really great opportunity for us to build products that could help people in this space, and in the process, learn about more general problems that we'd like to kind of push forward. And that's what gave rise to Inspect.
Wow. Benny, if I could interject really quickly, this is now
go
shying
ahead.
away from NFTs and more, me being a philosophy and sociology nerd. Charlie, I think you hit on something that's very like dire / dear to my heart, and I would assume people who care about humanity in general. We've come to a point in society where um, I want to generalize and just use the word misinformation, but legitimacy of the speaker at hand is very in question. And I think anyone and everyone seems to have an opinion, and it's hard to decipher whose opinion should matter more. And in essence, I think within Web3, NFT Inspect, in some ways in a joking fashion, but in others, there is quite some legitimacy to who you guys place first versus authenticize as owning a certain profile picture. To put you really on the spot, do you think that will ultimately bring to some level of like a dystopian future where, whether it might not be NFT Inspect, but some central body determines who is more legitimate than others?
No, I don't think so. So let me kind of give you the academic answer. One of my favorite misinformation researchers is Renee DiResta. She writes a lot about this problem of, I think she calls it dissensus, where basically society, previously organized, had a few kind of elites in charge of the media and in charge of truth. And this was actually really convenient from one perspective, in that everyone had a shared conception of who was authoritative and what was truthful. But it had a really big downside in that if they were wrong, or if they were intending to mislead, then you're kind of in a worse situation. And she's very careful to actually say it's unclear that our current environment of dissensus, as different from consensus, is better or worse. It's a killer problem to try to answer. But she stipulates that the cat's out of the bag. This environment isn't going to magically materialize to us all following Dan Rather and deciding that that's going to be the opinion that we're going to move forward with. So I think there's some inevitability of where we're going. And the decentralization components of Web3 are really pushing this notion that we need to try to take institutions that otherwise get really sloppy because they have so few kind of power holders and not great alignment with their stakeholders, and spread this out. So as it pertains to Inspect, our position is that we actually do not want to be the arbiters of who's the winner and who's the loser, or who's legitimate and who's not. I think you could read into our product right now and say, no, that's exactly what you're doing. But the reality is that we're building, and it's incremental, and the future that we're building toward is probably going to look a lot different than what things look like today. But our goal is to take all of the information that's available at the disposal of an individual, and undeniably public blockchain data is incredibly valuable, and basically project it in a way that people are able to make better decisions using that data. What's not acceptable to me is if, for instance, you were going to go and make a transaction with an NFT, and you didn't know that the person that you were interacting with on the other side either has no reputation or has a negative reputation. That is something that should be available to you. Now, whether you decide to use that or not, what negative means to you, how you decide to orient trust, and even what's important to you, those are all going to be individualized decisions that we want to enable you to kind of inform that projection. But what we believe at a very fundamental level is that more information is better. And if you think about societal progress in general, humans don't change very much, but the step changes that we've seen in progress have been places where individuals got better information so that they could make decisions kind of in a more aligned and more optimal way at a global scale.
Wow. That's some big brain stuff. To get to even more bigger brain stuff, I think you touched on it a little bit, Charlie. But how do you determine right now what is the algorithm at a high level for us smaller brains? What determines you being higher on the rank? What adjective you get? We've seen Shill and Villain talk about things. How does that all work?
Yeah, so I think it depends on what we're looking at. So we've got two types of rankings on Inspect today, the collection rankings and the profile rankings. Let me talk about the collection rankings because I think they're a little bit more interesting and more developed. The collection rankings fundamentally are based on social signals that we're able to discern, mostly on Twitter, from the individual collections. So important signals that we're considering in the rankings are things like what proportion of the NFTs that you have in your collection are represented by people on Twitter. And the idea here is that this is a crude way of us measuring community. You could imagine a collection that's dominated by one individual who owns all of the pieces. Or you could imagine a collection where everyone holds it, but nobody cares to actually rep it with their PFPs. Those are both scenarios where we would argue that the community is probably not as strong. Not a perfect correlation, but a reasonable one. Another thing that we consider for the collections is their reach. Undeniably, NFT collections are partially successful in that they need to get an audience. They need to have someone who actually cares. And you're really not going to be successful without that. It's a necessary but insufficient condition for being successful. And so reach is a core component for us. And what we're basically saying is amongst your members, how often are they appearing in people's feeds? If I've got an SMB, then the SMB collection can assume that places where I am, they're also represented. And that's what we're trying to get at with that reach. The final thing that we include is engagement. What people are generally doing is they're doing research on new projects all the time. Older projects sometimes too, they want to check in on them. They want to see how they're going. A positive sign of a healthy community is that people care. And that engagement component is really about a reflection of how much people care. Are they actually doing that research, doing those investigations? So what we do in our ranking is we basically rank collections on each of these factors, and then we aggregate those factors into the final ranking, which you see on the site. So that's collections, and quite a bit more sophisticated than profiles. With profiles, the only thing that we're ranking on today is reach. And ultimately, we'd like to move to a place where we're actually able to provide a more comprehensive view of the contributions of an individual to the ecosystem. And part of that is, what are the contributions that people bring to the table? And then ultimately, how do we build a view that's helpful for people in trying to understand, who should I work with? Who should I follow? Who should I listen to? We recently launched a feature we called nominations. It's, I think we'll actually be closing them in the coming weeks in favor of a new feature that we'll develop behind them. But this provides us a way of getting basically insights and endorsements from the broader community about unique ways that people are adding value beyond just having a huge audience, which disproportionately favors the shit posters and hyper posters. So things like, do you provide really great analysis? Are you a builder in the area? Are you a developer, a community manager? Are you a thought leader? Are you kind of pushing the space forward? And these are all things that we want to make sure that people are aware of. But we want to do that in a way that doesn't require us to weigh in. Because like you said, it's pretty dystopian if my opinions as an individual, sitting in Seattle, trump the vast majority of people who are out there. What we really want are objective facts that we can hand to people for them to make their own decisions.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. And that's something I kind of wanted to ask is like, how could you reward, say, like analysts more in the future than like shit posters? Like for example, if Big Brain were to show like a project at all, I feel like he would have a lot more influence than most shit posters. Maybe not like Alexander or somebody because he has like a lot of influence, it seems, but other people who are currently ahead of him.
It's a good question. I think the important thing is that Alex FUDs your project, not that he shows that it's kind of the contra signal. But Yeah, this is a question that we've been working on for weeks, if not months now. And the simple answer is it's kind of difficult. Partially because what you're really trying to get at is not engagement, which Twitter is incredibly optimized for. You're trying to get at quality. This is actually a canonical problem for social networks. Working at Facebook, we had this problem all the time where functionally you want to reward content that people actually find valuable. The only signal that they're giving you is whether they're going to engage with it. And those things aren't always correlated. And sometimes they become anti-correlated. So for us, there's a few things that we are bullish on overall. The first is that especially as Web3 starts to mature, we're anticipating more on-chain credentials. Basically, people putting out certain facts about someone's reputation that enable us to kind of localize their contributions in a way that's otherwise really difficult to do in like a traditional social network. The second thing that we're looking into is how do we take advantage of the network to try to tell us about the qualities of individuals. If you're an analyst, you probably have a bunch of other buddies who are analysts and you recognize good analysis. If you're a shit poster, you recognize good shit posters. And we can exploit this fact to a small degree with sufficient data to try to give us a better idea of where's the nucleus and ultimately who is orbiting around that. So at least in terms of developments, you should expect to see some new features launching from us over the coming weeks that try to address exactly this problem. Because we really do want to make sure, despite the fact that I love shitposter rankings, it's a whole lot of fun, probably do more on that. We want to make sure that the other contributors to the ecosystem are also getting their time to shine. And we think, and we've gotten a lot of feedback, even the nominations as they stand today have given light to accounts that otherwise people aren't aware of. I've had folks tell me that they've just gone down the list and looked at accounts and 50% of them they decided to follow, which is super cool.
This is an inevitable question coming from people working for a marketplace here, and perhaps my limited understanding of machine learning, but you must be seeing or have access to data that show heavy correlation between a anticipated mint coming up / mint occurring and the types of words that are used by different types of people with different profile pictures, and the correlation between that and how well a mint does / secondary trading and so forth. Do you guys have plans / thoughts on integrating / expanding this beyond what I would overly simplify as a social status tool versus a insight / analytics tool?
It's a good question. So let me try to say two things here. One, for us, our focus is not on short-term activity. I think that there are a lot of really great tools in the ecosystem that are going to give you better indicators for price action than things like community strength. And part of that is because community strength doesn't change quickly. It's social capital that gets built up. And as a result, there's not a whole lot of short-term alpha, and it doesn't anticipate price action. If you look at it in the long term, it certainly does. I'm not a huge NFT trader. I try not to over leverage myself, especially given how much time I've invested into Inspect. But we've run experiments where we look at some of the top social signals, try to find healthy communities that we thought were undervalued, bought a bunch of them. And, a couple months later, I think my average return was something like 2 or 3x. Of course, it's an inconsequential amount of money overall. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm going to become an NFT trader, but, these signals clearly have some value. So the first part of that is we're really focused on the long term, and we think that's important. The second thing there is just that overall, we think that the meta is going to evolve. And I'm sure you all have opinions on this. I'd actually love to kind of hear what Hyperspace's position is on this. Projects in general can go a number of different ways. And we've seen brand building projects and utility projects or tech company projects, access, alpha groups, blah, blah, blah. The ones that are going to be most durable, and you can kind of look through the list, are not necessarily going to be the ones that emphasize the trading aspect. That part of the NFT economy, we feel like, is probably the least durable, and one that we'd prefer to de-emphasize in our product development, in favor of things that are going to be more lasting. If Inspect is going to be anything, it's going to require that the NFT ecosystem mature quite a bit. And for us, the big question is, what are the vectors that it will mature, and how do we make sure that, in those environments, that we still have a great product that people love?
Do we want to jump into the spiciness, Benny, or do you have any?
Yeah, you have to. You can go ahead.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that I really want to talk about, is where are NFTs headed, / how does it integrate NFT Inspect / like the social capital aspect. And this is human being Brian John talking, not hyperspace employee Brian John talking. I I made a video recently, personally, covering where I think NFTs are headed / where I think NFTs must head if for this to not all be a scheme / Ponzi scheme. And I don't think personally that this flipping meta will continue. It's just not sustainable. And I think to a certain degree, people are obviously into gambling and making quick returns. And it's fun. I think there's a reason why NFTs are a lot more attractive than DeFi sometimes, for example, because the visual aspect is to it. As much as people make fun of the fact that we're trading JPEGs, I think quite literally the reason why it does so well is because we're trading JPEGs, and there's a different thrill that comes with trading monkey pictures for a certain amount. But in terms of like actual application / integration into the real world, I broke it down personally as financialization, commercialization, and then community. The first two being pretty self-explanatory, and the third, which I'm personally the most bullish on. I'm not personally an SMB holder, but I'm wearing a SMB hat to look more flexer than I am. But
Nice.
I remember during NFT NYC, the event that made me personally the most bullish, amongst other events that made me quite bearish, was the monkey serum event, where I met an entire network of people that I would have never met if it wasn't for my in with through our company, which was sponsoring the event. And there's something quite magical / weird about the fact that you're now able to enter into an established community by essentially paying for it, but only if you know that it exists, and also bringing together a group of people that wouldn't have met otherwise. I think it's potentially the first time in human history where it's not education gated, it's not activity gated, it's not ability gated. It's quite literally purchasable to a certain degree, but it's also some level of interest overlap. And I personally think that's where it makes the most sense. And Charlie, you hit on the point that social capital is built over time, and I think there's a reason why the maturest of Solana NFT communities that didn't incentivize flipping and selling, that have incentivized continuing and staying, are the ones that are most sought after, and frankly are the richest and the most expensive, because it's a community that people want to join. And that's where I personally find value. Granted, one, I am not an active trader myself, and two, I'm someone that is very person oriented. So it's something that I seek value in personally. I don't know if that's necessarily where a meta is headed. I wouldn't even call like community a meta per se. It's always been at the core of where NFTs were, but I do see the communities like SMB, DeGods, ever more so maturing and being even more so an NFT gated community that people want to join. And I wouldn't say that's necessarily a utility. It's hard to deliver new projects and saying our utility is creating a new community, because that's very, very forward thinking, and also you can't guarantee that. It's not something that you can sell. But that's personally where I think things have always headed, and things will continue to head as this entire industry molds itself.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think SMB is definitely one of the more interesting projects to watch long term. And I don't spend nearly as much time as I could in the Discord these days, but it's always interesting to see the tension between holders who are emphasizing how do you make the price go up, and holders who are really emphasizing kind of the DAO and the decentralized community that they're building. And it's funny because neither side has really won in my mind. But it's also one of the few projects that explicitly cares probably more about that latter than they do about the price action. They're being very reasonable, and kudos to Jemmy and Nom and others who are kind of steering that ship. But yeah, I don't think they've completely given up on their price is important to their holders, but they also are really emphasizing the premier Web3 community that they're building. So kind of undeniable. The thing for me that's a little bit interesting is communities gated on purchases aren't that generalizable. If you think about society at large, what's the total addressable market of communities that you can buy into? Probably pretty small. I mean, there are certainly places where people are willing to put their money in order to get access to a group of individuals, country clubs that existed forever, but they've always been kind of on the fringe. And the real question I think should be in everyone's mind is, what does this look like if, and how does it get to a point where it kind of applies to everyone? And in my mind, there's a lot of really interesting aspects, but it will start actually not with communities that you can purchase into, but communities that are either free given your background and reputation, or that actually pay people to become a part of their community. I think when we start to see that action, we'll know that the era of NFTs of community has truly arrived. And I'm kind of surprised we haven't seen more of it just yet. But part of it, I think, is this bear has to come through and really wipe out a lot of the noise that had otherwise been happening, so that these types of ideas can finally see the light of day. So we'll see. It should be a very interesting year to see what persists and what sort of new structures will evolve.
Benny, you've been relatively bearish recently. What do you envision
Yeah.
happening here?
Well, I'm just bearish because it seems like the projects that are coming onto Solana are just very low effort. They're kind of copying like projects that have done well, whether that be DeGods, OK Bears, and not really having any originality to them. Maybe that has something to do with this branding meta that was created. But at the current moment, I'm bearish just because due to the saturation of the market, and like neutrality said, like there needs to be an exit for some of these players because there's just like too much going on. But I'm very curious as to what he mentioned here regarding like kind of paid communities. That's something we haven't seen, and I'd be curious to like how that would work. Like, would these companies or NFTs have a runway? One thing that I know is going to happen in the future is there's going to be two separate asset classes for NFTs. One can be considered a security, and then one's going to be towards like the art side, and that's just up for interpretation. It's just a matter of when, not if, in my opinion. But what are your thoughts on that? Or actually, I guess going back to my question, it's like, could you kind of dive into what you meant by like a paid community, and like where you've heard these ideas, or is this just an idea you've had yourself? Yeah, I'm quite curious.
I struggle to remember. I did a bunch of deep dives in this, looking for these types of communities in ETH. I vaguely recall an experiment going on Near where someone was doing this, which I thought was interesting. But no, I don't think generally you see it. And part of the reason is it's kind of a question of what's your incentive. Why would you pay someone to join your community? The reality actually is that people will do this today through whitelists. What is implicitly happening is that you're paying someone to join your community, A, to do some incentive alignment, but B, because they've got reach. And that will probably remain true for a long time. There will always be value in communities to have marketing and comms and try to get their message out. But the real question is there value aside from just pure reach? And to your point, there is kind of this question of when do we graduate beyond this sort of repetitive meta where folks aren't innovating too much. And they're kind of building projects on the heels of other things that they've seen be successful. I honestly think a lot of this is happening right now under our noses, and we're just not noticing it yet. I don't want to name any projects because I feel like at a certain point it becomes a shill. But if you go look into some of these smaller stage projects, the ones with founders that have real backbone and commitment, there are actually a lot of builders out there who, against, I think, better judgment, are trying something new, not getting a whole lot of attention, certainly not getting a lot of funding. And if they're successful, they will change the meta. So you really have to dig, unfortunately, in order to be optimistic in this space. Otherwise, it's easy to kind of get overwhelmed with, bearish sentiment, like what you mentioned.
Would you say the founders, like, of the, you don't have to name drop those projects, do they have like good experience, whether that be in tech or somewhere else?
Some do, some don't. I think, and this is a really interesting space in that you don't necessarily need that background in order to get started. I love the kind of democratization that provides. Although I look at, and I'm just an engineer, and so I look at a lot of technical execution and I go, holy shit, these people would learn a lot if they went and worked for a big company for just a short amount of time to understand the engineering fundamentals in order to be successful. And that's just kind of a trade-off that you get. If you lower the floor to enable more people to get on the boat, you also are going to have to eat some of these otherwise junior mistakes that people are going to make. For these projects, I see everything. I see these massively successful individuals who are coming over and trying something entirely new, maybe just because they're interested. I also see people with bright eyes and new ideas that have no skills whatsoever, but that are just really interested in pushing on something. And it remains to be seen who's going to actually win. It's not obvious that it's one or the other.
One thing that Benny and I came across yesterday, and something that we've gone back and forth on, is the entrance of celebrities into this market, which in some ways make natural sense because they're people of high exposure, high influence, always trying to be at the forefront of new things. But oftentimes, especially in the Solana ecosystem, we see it not really working out. And I think that logically makes sense as people that have been in the space for long. Obviously, non-Web3 native people just trying to use their name to sell to something. A lot of times it's not even them themselves that are involved. They probably have some team running it and they're just putting a little stamp to say, the Brian Jen collection. And people are like, oh my gosh, Brian Jen's tied to it. Do you think that NFT Inspect has a place in terms of allowing the deciphering between someone's original influence versus their influence in Web3 now? And furthermore, I think more of a personal question, what are your thoughts on celebrities entering the space, especially those that are genuinely trying to enter, not just like the Jimmy Fallons of the world who's changing their profile picture to a BASE for a day? What do you think that merge will continue to occur, or do you think most celebrities will stay away for the time being?
Really good questions. And I have to think about it a little bit more deeply in order to give you a more complete answer. But
Sure.
off the cuff, you can kind of categorize celebrities by how much of their brand and reputation is based on just people knowing their name versus having specific opinions about them. Again, I don't want to FUD too much, but there are certainly a lot of celebrities who you could probably name who have entered the Web3 space. And it's very clear that they've got nothing to lose, that they're sponsoring rug pulls, that, functionally, I think they're going to get indicted. Like, a lot of these people are going to be in legal trouble very quickly. But it's because the only thing that they really bring is that people have heard of them before. On the other hand, there are some celebrities, and Fallon is kind of an interesting example where they're actually putting something at stake. He's not going to have a job for very long if people develop this idea that he's just, rug pulling or trying to extract liquidity from Web3. And in fact, making associations to Web3 right now is actually a gamble for many influential individuals. And so it's kind of telling when these people do decide to do that. The Inspect angle is kind of interesting because when we look at our data, the celebrities are always at the top of our follower counts. Eminem, Shaq, Jimmy Fallon, Paris Hilton, etc. They're very rarely at the top of reach. And part of the reason for that is that people in this space actually tend to be hyper-focused on engaging internally, as opposed to being the normie that these celebrities are kind of accumulating as followers. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that evolves. I think, honestly, the space is probably due for a pullback of celebrity exposure until it can start to justify its existence a bit more. And what I mean by that is we need to see some of these really strong, positive examples, use cases, communities really shine so that it's not so damaging. If you think about it as a celebrity, it's really a calculus of, what's the reward here? for me and my fans? And then what's the cost? And right now, the costs are rising dramatically, and the reward is dropping as a result of the market. And so we'll have to see that level. And I don't think it's going to come on the backs of the reward growing like it did during the last bull. I think it will be the costs need to lower.
I kind of love that take that you say like celebrity exposure in the space will have a pullback. I don't think I've ever heard that like mentioned or like even like thought about like, you know, kind of the impact that they have and like they're going to exit the space. But I believe that when you talk about a bear market, they're going to be like, oh, like I'm done with this. And like a lot of people are going to struggle with that aspect as well. And there's just going to be a pullback, but that's a cool take. Like I like it. Any thoughts, Brian?
One thing that's slightly higher level that I've thought about is the only comparison I can that pull together versus Web3 is Web2 versus Web1, and frankly, we were all probably neutrality, not to date you, but I would assume we were all relatively young during the internet boom, and I wonder if this is like pure contemplation and the as bearish I can get. But frankly, to your point, like Web3 doesn't have the greatest name for the general public. Like people think NFTs are a scam. A lot of people think cryptocurrencies are a scam. And I wonder if sentiments were similar for when the internet first came out or anything else that was fundamentally going to shake up the world. And if so, how the world / the industry came back from that once the rugs of that era or the bears of that era fell out. Because frankly, right now, with my limited brain, I can't think of a scenario that would turn the paradigm and allow my mom and dad to participate in Web3 in the way that at least we're participating. Like I can't envision any scenario where my parents would care about what their profile picture looks like on Twitter. And I wonder what that shift was for the internet or anything else of a similar degree.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any unique insights. I think I'm definitely older than you all, but not that much older. It is really fun to reason about like the last euphoric moment followed by a big crash and what we can learn from it. Because I think a lot of people very naively will extrapolate and they'll say, "Oh, just keep building." That and this is basically just the selection bias that you're doing. You're just kind of looking at, okay, all the big companies exist now, they existed then, ergo, you know, my only job is to continue. But clearly, there was a bunch of very high profile blowups that came on the result of some of these companies just literally weren't adding real value. And that's the clarity that a bear market really provides, is to try to strip away what actually isn't adding value to get back to the core. And unfortunately, oftentimes that core value grows organically. It doesn't grow very quickly. And so it is hard to imagine a scenario where, you know, your parents or grandparents are engaging in this, and maybe they never will. I personally have been surprised that my mom ever got on social, but it was a natural fit after 50% of her friends were on it and they each taught each other what was going on. And so you've kind of got this dynamic where people need to come back to this idea of what actually are we building? And is this reasonable, or is this just wishful thinking? We just want it to happen because number goes up or because this is some future that we'd love to see happen, but there's really no basis in the market or in human nature to pick it up. But then secondly, we have to be patient. And it's reasonable to be bullish and focused on those things that are actually working. But to expect that they're going to rise at the rate that we've been accustomed to is kind of folly. And I think this is the fun, is that a lot of people will walk away from the space, sometimes with very good reason, and sometimes in part because they just can't see what a future looks like when you extrapolate over slower growth trajectories than what they've been used to. You kind of get your perspectives tainted a bit by seeing these hyper growths.
For sure.
I think it's very interesting the comparison you bring with like social media and your mother. Like people who are older of age, they were against it at first, but then over time, you know, people slowly adapted. And I think you could use that same comparison for Web3 or NFTs. So that kind of leads me to a question I had. Do you think like there will be a future Web3 social media platform? Or do you guys have like even like a more basic question, like could you integrate your kind of like NFT Inspect on other sites like Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, or what are your thoughts regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, so transparently, part of the reason that Inspect isn't a social network is because we don't think that social is going to become a monolith platform in the coming years, that we think that there will be fragmentation in the ecosystem, and that users need a way of distilling and accumulating data from many different sources so that they can make the best possible decisions. Today, that's on Twitter, in Discord. You've got all sorts of group chats and alpha groups and other things. There's also, just general discussion, sometimes on Reddit, sometimes on YouTube. It's everywhere. And I don't actually expect that to change. My opinion on a Web3 social platform, I think people aren't being inventive enough with what social actually means, that they just aren't differentiating. You can't just add tokens to Twitter and then assume that this is going to blow up. It doesn't. It actually makes for some pretty horrible products. It's got to be fundamentally different. And there are things in Web3 that are fundamentally different. The incentive alignments, rewarding creators, et cetera, but it'll look revolutionary. It will look nothing like the social that we've been used to if it's going to be successful. And I don't know that it's actually a good idea for this to become a singular platform on which everything resides. Like, I'm actually a big fan of the old web, where you actually had a bunch of different platforms that were all competing and people had more sovereignty over their presence. I think there are really strong forces in the market, and for good reasons, because they provide, in a lot of cases, better services to centralize this. But I think we should all, in some ways, resist that temptation to make sure that we're getting a better product at the end of the day. I think as consumers, it's really easy for us to favor kind of a monolith platform because it makes our life easier. But what we fail to realize is that in 5 years' time, the counterfactual where we didn't do that is actually probably a significantly better experience. We're just too short-sighted to see it. Now, whether the token models of Web3 enable better consumer behavior, I'm a little bit doubtful, but I'm hoping that products like Inspect enable people to make better decisions because they've got better data at their disposal and they can kind of see what others may not be seeing. The only reason to be optimistic over the course of humanity is that people will pick up at least 10% of what the history has told them and more about their surroundings. But I don't think more than that is actually even a reasonable assumption.
Wow.
I have a quick point regarding that. I feel like whatever Web3 social media, or like even if Twitter or Facebook like evolve, whoever kind of enables or rewards content creation will be like the leading platform for social media. I feel like that's the future that we're heading towards. I know that's something that me and Brian are like very bullish on, is content creation. You should be making your own content more than you should be consuming it. Brian, you have any thoughts?
No, I'm a big proponent of that myself. And Benny's making fun because I really see a YouTube video recently titled you should, or maybe it wasn't titled that, but I was talking about how you should try to create more than you consume, especially if the default is consuming. Yeah, I think we've come to a point where people are exhausted and consuming, and you have to, not you have to, but if you're part of our generation, you're recommended to somehow participate in the creator economy. Everyone thinks they're a creator. And I think it's one or the other now. I think it's either you decide to not participate and make use of your time in IRL stuff, or if you do participate, you should probably use some of that time to create and try to make something out of it. Because frankly, like the amount of hours that you spend watching videos or on TikTok and Twitter is just astounding. And I'm someone that's relatively old school in this regard, as ironic as that might be, being in the space. And it's quite sad to see a lot of people, especially slightly younger than us, in this pretty shitty version of the metaverse where they're watching videos all day and very detached from their real friends. Not to go on long, but I was at this nightclub on Saturday, and it's like infamous in New York as the intern club because all these summer interns go there. And it seemed like all these COVID college era kids didn't know how to party. They came in, they looked at a mirror, took a selfie, and they just stood there. And I just saw them trade socials, and no one knew how to dance, no one knew how to talk, no one knew how to do anything. And
you're a boomer. I'm gonna give you your boomer card.
I instantly got this fear of like, this is what the future looks like, and if this is the future, I don't want to partake in it, and it scares me that I'm contributing to that future. But yeah, I think if you're gonna participate, you should create. Is my slogan.
It's kind of an interesting idea. I think it's a mistake that a lot of people will make to just assume that the new culture is necessarily worse. But I think there's a lot of objective measures that we can look at in terms of how people are relating to one another, mental health, et cetera, that aren't trending in the right direction. And you have to ask, is this partly because of the culture that we've created? As it pertains to creators, this is fascinating to me. And I'll try to limit my comments to make sure I'm not revealing anything confidential. But if you watch Adam Mosseri from Instagram has a TED Talk where he talks a little bit about kind of his vision for, in some sense, Web3 at Instagram. And it's a really great pitch, actually. He tries to emphasize how making creators money is pretty core, and that in some sense, collectibles, NFTs, et cetera, provide a new angle to do that. Because if you look at the economics of big platforms, TikTok, YouTube, there's a ton of people who would love to be full-time creators. The vast majority of them aren't making any reasonable amount of money. And it's not actually because the platforms are taking an outsized cut. You can multiply the earnings by 2 or 3 of the median creator, and it's still not meaningful amount of money. This is the primary complaint that people have with Spotify. It's like you can actually make great music, but your stream revenue is actually not meaningful. At a certain point, this caps. And maybe if you're kind of an Elon Musk or a Mark Zuckerberg, your assumption is that AI is going to take over. We're going to have this huge surplus, and then all that humans can actually do is create, and we should figure out how to reward them in this metaverse ideal. I'd love to see that happen. It's probably more than 50 years away in my estimation. But I think for all of us in Web3, asking that question of like, what is the value surplus that comes from the new inventions that we're creating? How does this make my life materially better? Is this NFT, as an example, something that is going to offer me a social experience or friends or something else that is in excess of that time that I would spend on TikTok earning N ad dollars that then get deposited in the hands of the creators that are providing me that content? That's kind of the calculus that I think a lot of us should have in our mind for at least some of the experiences that we're building in Web3.
Wow. I just want to say, without kissing too much ass, this might be the most intellectual conversation I've had in Web3. Especially recently. I've just been so like, not down, but just disappointed by some of the conversations I've been having. And this is very, very refreshing. Benny, any final thoughts as we close off? I'm more than overfilled at the moment.
Yeah, I just wanted to like kind of talk about the social change that has already been inspired by NFT Inspect. I've known Alexander for a while, and from my conversations with him, like he cared immensely about his ranking with NFT Inspect, saying he'd be #1 in like March or April. And I kind of think he's like kind of set the tone of being super active and putting in hours on Twitter to produce like content that people would enjoy, like engage with, whatever. And kind of like people are now starting to tweet like 1,000 times a day just to get their NFT Inspect ranking up. So what are kind of your thoughts on like the social change that you've already inspired that you maybe didn't think about initially, and kind of like the long-term vision that you guys have? Because I'm sure this isn't the long-term vision that you guys have, like, and kind of the differentiation between the two.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. I've chatted with Alex on a few occasions. Super cool guy, and honestly, he puts together some hilarious content. Got a talent. Not anyone can actually do what he does, even if they tweet thousands of times a day.
100%.
Generally speaking, I don't want people to just be spending a whole lot of time on Twitter trying to fight over a ranking. That doesn't meet any criteria that I have for meaningful social change. So the short answer is that's not really what I'm looking for. There's a tension for us in developing a product that people actually care about and then aligning it with things that we all should care about. And you can easily miss on either one. What you have, and I follow a lot of projects on ETH, which Brian, if you're actually burnt out on some of the grind in Web3, I think there's a lot more innovative projects that are happening over there that are almost academic in nature.
Oh.
And the cool thing about it is they're great ideas. The horrible thing about it is they're almost never going to get any users. We haven't tapped into anything that's actually meaningful. And the breakthroughs are going to be things that are actually attractive, that get people engaged, but continue to move the needle and pull that lever towards something meaningful. So Benny, I think my short answer for you is this isn't a terminal stage for us. We do want to make sure that we've got enough engagement, enough user input to keep optimizing, but we don't actually believe that we can just build some technology that will take us directly there. And we think the progress needs to be organic. And the best way for us to learn is to build something and then iterate with community and user feedback. And for what it's worth, I think some of the things that you're mentioning are things that have been brought up to us before and that we're actively working on addressing. So we'll have to share with you some updates in the coming weeks that I think will start to move the needle. We certainly won't be able to jump straight there, but we'll continue to fight the good fight to make sure that the space is hopefully headed to a trajectory that we can all be proud of.
Yeah. And as you kind of like progress on this trajectory and fulfill some of that long-term vision, what's kind of the plans for like future monetization, whether that be like, somebody like you form a partnership with, maybe a buyout, like your own NFT, like what are kind of the thoughts you've had regarding that with NFT Inspect?
The monetization question has been one that we've kind of spent a lot of time with. And the simple answer is we haven't figured it out yet, and we want to take our time because it's one of the most consequential decisions that you can make as a project. There's actually a lot of really great projects with really great founders who get tied into certain financial arrangements that ultimately sabotage their long-term success. And we want to make sure that that doesn't happen for us. Right now, we make a reasonable amount of revenue, nothing groundbreaking, by actually partnering with projects on listings, or there's actually a recent set of projects around flex to earn or staking that's associated with PFPs that we're collaborating with other platforms on. Definitely worth a look if you're a collection and you want to figure out how to get your community more engaged on Twitter. It also supports Inspect. Longer term, we really want to figure out what's the right way for us to get more decentralization into Inspect, both to democratize the decision-making process. So it's not just me and my co-founder and other folks that are working with us who are deciding what's important, what's not, but it's actually a reflection of the community. And we do want to make it to where there is more communal ownership. Now, what that looks like, is it a token? Is it an NFT? Is it something else entirely? Kind of undecided at this point. And then finally, for us, we think that there's always going to be space for a free product. We actually had substantial amount of interest in a paid product, but we decided, hey, I'd rather spend my time making sure the free product is as good as possible than distract ourselves, at least at this moment. But longer term, we probably will have paid offerings that offer some value add services. And I'm anticipating doing kind of B2B relationships with other Web3 protocols and marketplaces, et cetera, just to make sure that we're able to kind of keep the lights on for our mission, because it's not free in order for us to kind of run our infra and also to fund the development. So short answer, don't know yet, but we've got a lot of options and we'll be exploring them.
I respect that a lot. I feel like at Hyperspace, we've kind of taken like a similar approach. Don't you agree, Brian?
Yeah, we're definitely the final selfish product show, but yeah, we've, jokes aside, we've taken definitely let's make sure the product is good enough and more than good for not just users but ecosystem partners, and we're far more focused on user acquisition as opposed to making money, which I think in the long run will benefit both goals anyways, which it seems like NFT Inspect is also positioning itself for. But yeah, that's something that we're very, very, very big picture, long-term focused than short-term gains at Hyperspace for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, respect what you guys are doing. I'm really excited about it.
Cool. Well, Charlie, thank you for your time. Benny, thanks for organizing and hosting. Any final thoughts, Charlie, as we sign off?
No, it's been really great chatting with you, and I always love kind of the more serious inquiries and discussions. I think they're kind of a breath of fresh air for folks who are in the space and kind of observing some of the nastiness and friction that's present, because I think we all have to remind ourselves what we're really building for. If folks are kind of interested in our mission and in building, with us, love partnerships. We also have a bunch of open positions, so feel free to reach out to me. I'm Nootrality, Nootrality on Twitter. And thanks so much for the time, guys. It was a great chat.
Great. Good seeing you guys. Talk soon.
Yeah. Great podcast. Great convos.
Wow.
See ya.